Democratic socialism is like a dating profile. Things look great until you meet up in the real world. For example, Bernie Sanders, his big thing was always bringing single-payer health care to our country of 340 million. But when liberal, tie-dyed Vermont tried to do it for a population of 626,000, it collapsed like that poor in the Oval Office last week. The DSA are radicals about this concept, and radical economic policy is always ineluctably married to radical social policy.
The left is selling the same old idea again, and Bill Maher is not having it. Bernie Sanders is back to his usual moves. Tax the rich, call it fair, and act like that solves everything. It sounds great in a speech. It looks good online. But when you look at it closely, it starts to break down. And Maher doesn't just disagree, he tears the whole thing apart and shows what they don't want people to know. It's direct, it's sharp, and you can't look away. So if you like political talk that's straight and honest, hit subscribe and let's get into it.
The American economy, to me, I know I've said this before, I still don't get it. Last week was tax day, and as usual, because HBO is so generous, and I'm sure so will be the new owners, I paid to the government, if you add in state tax, local, sales, property, fees, Obamacare, probably almost 60% of what I earn. That's a lot. And I still wouldn't mind if Bernie Sanders would stop saying the rich don't pay taxes. And while I'm sure the super rich with their army of accountants and corporate loopholes get away with murder, us regular rich people pay a shit ton of taxes. And who stands up and gives us a pat on the back? Nobody, that's who.
Maher doesn't ease in. He doesn't warm up the crowd. He goes straight to the point by using himself as the example first. By his own words, he makes around $10 million a year. And this is where the whole "the rich aren't paying enough" argument starts to fall apart. He says when you add up federal taxes, state taxes, local sales taxes, property costs, Obamacare, and everything else together, he's already giving up close to 60% of what he makes. 60%. Read that again. More than half of every dollar is gone before he even gets to keep it. So when Bernie Sanders gets back on his usual stage and says the wealthy still aren't paying their fair share, Maher's own paycheck proves that wrong in a big way. Because if someone at his level is already losing $6 out of every $10, then the question asks itself, how much is enough before fairness slowly turns into straight-up punishment?
The top 10% pay 72% of all federal income taxes, and the bottom half, 3%. The Democratic Socialists talk about socialism like we don't already have a lot. Social Security, unemployment, Medicare, nutritional assistance, Medicaid, Obamacare, disability, housing subsidies. Again, not against it, just the same question. How can you be soaking the rich and failing the poor so badly?
And the question gets even harder when the bigger numbers come into the picture. Maher points to a stat that blows the whole argument apart. The top 10% already pay 72% of all federal income taxes, while the bottom half pays just 3%. 72%. Almost 3/4 of the entire federal tax bill sitting on one small group of people. And yet, after all this money is moved around, the people we are told this whole system is supposed to help still aren't being helped. The Federal Reserve says the bottom 50% of Americans own just 2.5% of the country's wealth. The U.S. Census Bureau says around 37 million Americans are still living below the poverty line. So Maher hits with the question that blows the whole thing wide open. If huge amounts of money are already being taken from the top to help the bottom, then why is the bottom still struggling? Why hasn't anything changed? Why is the same problem still this bad after all this money has supposedly been spent to fix it?
So badly that on 60 Minutes last week, they were redoing the story they did 18 years ago about remote area medical. That is the program modeled after medical teams that drop into the poorest countries in the world for a few days to set up a tent where people with no access to health care can get some. And now we're one of those countries. Doctors within borders.
damage doesn't stop at the poverty line. It's cutting straight through the middle class too. The people who used to be the strong backbone of this country are getting crushed by rising costs, wages that won't move, and a system that keeps taking more while giving back less. And the bigger picture is hard to look at. America used to be the country writing the checks, the nation sending help around the world, the one that showed up when others needed rescuing. Now large parts of its own population look like they need rescuing themselves. Food banks at home are overwhelmed. Working families are barely getting by in the wealthiest country on the planet. Charities that used to count on American giving are quietly shutting down because the money isn't coming in like it used to. And that should be a huge wake-up call for Washington, because when the richest country in the world starts looking this weak from the inside, the problem isn't about adding a new tax bracket. The problem runs much deeper than that.
How can it be that the federal government alone took in over $5 trillion in taxes last year, and we still need that? Are we really this incompetent and corrupt? Don't answer that. Whatever it is, somehow the ultra-rich keep getting ultra-richer, while a growing percentage is feeling truly desperate. You just wouldn't know it because everyone on TV is rich. Reality TV, rich women day drinking. Drama, rich women whose friend got murdered. Comedy, rich men shouting into cell phones.
And if you have followed Maher even a little, none of this is new from him. He has been saying the same thing for a long time, and his point is brutally simple. This was never really a tax problem. It is a spending problem. The federal government already collected over $5 trillion in taxes last year, and somehow the same problems are still sitting right where they were. Poverty hasn't moved. Homelessness keeps growing. The middle class keeps getting smaller. So where exactly is all that money going? Maher points straight at California, because honestly, you could not find a more obvious example if you tried. The state taxes its people heavily, calls itself forward-thinking and morally better, and yet its streets keep telling a completely different story. Homelessness everywhere, inequality everywhere, chaos everywhere. That is the part that kills the whole argument, because if more taxes automatically meant more solutions, California would be a great place to live. Instead, it keeps looking like a warning to the rest of the country. Money keeps pouring in, and the same broken results keep coming out the other side. Sonnet 4.6.
Mendami seems like a nice guy, and I congratulate him on an extraordinary political achievement. But before the whole left side of the country catches socialism fever, let's listen to the other big winner in last Tuesday's election, Virginia Governor-elect Abigail Spanberger, who, before the 24 election, said things like, "If the party didn't shift to the center, we will get torn apart. And we need to never use the word socialist or socialism ever again." Well, she was right, but they didn't listen. Typical, am I right, ladies? One wing is saying don't ever use the word socialist again, and one is saying,
I am a democratic socialist.
Clear, huh? So how do we decide who's right?
And this is where Maher stops sounding like just a comedian with opinions and starts sounding like someone doing open surgery on live television. His argument isn't only that the Democratic Socialists are wrong on policy. His argument is that they are actively destroying the Democratic Party from the inside. Their message is built for activist cheering and online attention, not for the people who actually decide elections. It is soaked in ideology, wrapped in moral superiority, and almost completely out of touch with how regular Americans actually live. Workers, parents, small business owners, tired middle-class families. None of them are sitting around asking for a lesson in revolutionary politics. They want safer streets. They want their paychecks to actually mean something. They want a government that simply works. Maher's answer is short and sharp. Pull the party back to the center before it is too late. Stop performing for the loudest and most extreme voices in the room and start talking like a normal person again. The Democrats didn't lose regular people by accident. They chose to walk away from them, and regular people quietly walked away right back.
Democratic socialism is like a dating profile. Things look great until you meet up in the real world. For example, Bernie Sanders, his big thing was always bringing single-payer health care to our country of 340 million. But when liberal, tie-dyed Vermont tried to do it for a population of 626,000, it collapsed like that poor the Oval Office last week. Bernie, AOC, Mandani are not Democrats. They'll be the first to tell you that. They're democratic socialists, and that's a very different thing, and I don't think people know that.
And underneath all of this is the part that really makes Maher's argument land hard. Socialism has always had a beautiful sales pitch, and that is exactly why it keeps surviving long after reality has proven it wrong. On paper, it sounds almost impossible to argue against. Equality, fairness, shared wealth, nobody left behind. It sounds caring, it sounds noble, it sounds like the obvious right thing to do. But the moment it has to work in the real world outside of a slogan, things fall apart fast. History keeps teaching the same lesson, and somehow parts of the left keep acting like they never saw it coming. Venezuela, Cuba, the Soviet Union, countries that believed in the dream and ended up buried under collapse, repression, shortages, or all three at the same time. The evidence isn't hidden or quiet. It is loud and clear, written across decades and into the suffering of millions of real people. And yet the love for the idea still refuses to go away. Because for some people, the feel-good story of socialism is more emotionally satisfying than admitting how badly it fails when put into practice. And that, as Maher would gladly point out, isn't compassion at all. It is just denial with a good-looking mask on.
Again, this is against why people sometimes, I think, question some of what you're saying. This is a survey student loan forgiveness recipients. 73% of applicants say they are likely to spend their extra money on non-essential, including vacations, smartphone, drugs, and alcohol. They admitted that to the pollster.
Who is this pollster?
NBC News. 52% they are very likely to buy new clothing. 46% they would use the money for vacation and eat out at restaurants.
And here is another reason Maher thinks this whole pitch keeps failing in America. Most Americans, whether they say it out loud or not, are capitalists by nature. Call it culture. Call it the way they were raised. Call it ambition. Call it human nature. The pattern stays the same. For all of its problems, capitalism still keeps beating every other option the left keeps trying to make look attractive. And Maher drives the point home with one of the sharpest moments in the whole segment when he reads out responses from student debt forgiveness recipients. These are people who just had a huge financial weight lifted off their shoulders. And what did many of them say they were going to do with that extra money? Invest it, travel, buy a house, upgrade their lifestyle. Some even mentioned alcohol, vacations, and things they didn't really need. Not exactly the start of a socialist revolution. That is pure capitalist thinking from the very people the movement said it was trying to save. And that is Maher's bigger point. Americans don't dream about being taken care of forever. They dream about getting ahead, owning something, building something of their own. If the left keeps ignoring that simple truth, 2028 isn't going to be a close debate. It is going to be a clear verdict.
I know the kids think that stuff that happened before their appearance on the planet didn't really happen, but it did. We've run this experiment many times, and the results are always obvious. Here's capitalist South Korea at night from space. Here's socialist North Korea. Yeah. In 1990, Venezuela was wealthier than Poland. But then Poland, finally free of Soviet-style economics, went all in on capitalism. And now their economy is as big as Japan. And people there have high wages, low inflation, cars, vacations, homes.
Maher doesn't let the argument stay in theory. He pulls it straight back to the historical record and lets what actually happened tell the story. Venezuela was once one of the richest countries in Latin America. Now it is a national disaster of shortages, out of control inflation, and economic ruin. Cuba turned into a museum of poverty and repression under decades of communist rule. The Soviet Union walked around like an unbreakable superpower until it collapsed under the weight of its own failures. He even brings in the contrast that is impossible to ignore. Nobody can unsee capitalist South Korea lighting up the night sky when viewed from space, while socialist North Korea looks like someone turned the lights off on an entire country. One image, two systems, no room for debate. And then comes the part Maher absolutely refuses to accept. The idea that America would somehow figure out what every other country could not, just because America has better technology, more innovation, and more confidence. Maher isn't buying it for even a second. Economic reality doesn't care about American exceptionalism. Socialism doesn't keep failing because everyone else just got unlucky. The problem isn't in how it was carried out. The problem is built into the idea itself.
I don't think people realize we already have a lot of socialism. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, food stamps, veterans benefits, Pell Grants, COVID-era payments, farm subsidies, disability payments, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, corporate bailouts, and the jobs program that is building weapons the Pentagon doesn't even want. All that is socialism, much of it appropriate to soften the edges of capitalism, but the DSA are radicals about this concept, and radical economic policy is always ineluctably married to radical social policy. Their platform, for example, calls for completely open borders. They're for what Biden was doing, but more.
So there it is. Bill Maher, never one to soften the blow or dress up the truth, just delivered another masterclass in cutting through political fairy tales. The argument is solid. Hitting the rich even harder is not the magic fix that Bernie Sanders and the Democratic Socialists keep selling like it is the only answer. The real problem was never that the government doesn't have enough money. The real problem is what happens to the money after it goes in. Trillions collected, same pain, same poverty, same struggling middle class, same homeless crisis, same California story playing on repeat. And socialism's track record across history is still nothing but a long line of warnings dressed up as bright ideas. Americans think like capitalists. That is not going to change just because a few politicians found a newer way to repackage a very old failure. And if the Democratic Party refuses to wake up, read the room, and move back toward the center, 2028 is going to hit them like a train they never saw coming. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Sonnet 4.6.